because that always has to happen. But we are live. Hello, LinkedIn and YouTube. What the heck's going on? Man, I haven't seen y'all in a couple weeks, and I am so glad to be back with another episode of Lee After Dark because, I love getting to know the people that I interact with every day on a deeper level and really finding out who they are as humans. All right? So if you don't know who I am for some stupid reason, I'm Lee Rowley. And this here is Lee After Dark Live. Why? Because there's more to being a business leader than just business. That's why. And each episode, we bring on one entrepreneur to eject the elevator pitch and just get real with us for a while. Today, I would like to introduce my friend, Chris Hardee. Chris, how the heck are you today?
I'm doing great, Lee. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to have you on the show. And you've been an ardent supporter of my content on LinkedIn, my rantings and ravings and bellicose this and that. So, it's just great to have you on the show. And that's why I was just like, we're talking back and forth all the time in the comments, excuse me. And so why the heck not see what you're really all about? Right?
Sounds great.
That's why I cooked up this show. And I just realized I used the word bellicose and I used it totally out of context and it was improper usage. Total copywriter foul. But, stream of consciousness, sometimes that happens. For the next 20 minutes, you can talk about anything on earth you want except for your business. Okay? After that, you got 5 minutes to pitch up a storm. Now, we've got the game element of this thing, which is this. If you slip up and mention your business during the interview, you lose 1 minute of pitch time per infraction. All right? That has never happened in the history of this show, but I always threaten people with it because it just sounds good. Cool?
Sounds good.
All right. So I'm going to start the timer here. And what would you like to get into for the next 20 minutes or so?
Well, my wife actually came up with this idea, and she said, what if you tell us some stories about your grandparents and share some of the life lessons that they taught me along the way? And I got to admit, doing this has been such a gift because I've gotten to relive a lot of the memories that from when they were alive, and it's just been a wonderful experience.
Wonderful. Okay, so obviously this is something that's had a profound impact on you. So let's just pick a tale and start. I want to hear more about this.
Okay. Well, I will tell you this. I've lived all my life in the South. And for the past 28 years, my wife is from Long Island, and I've lost somewhat of my accent. So if you listen carefully, you may hear some of my accent come back as I go through and tell these stories. Because I find like when I'm talking to my dad or back when I talk to my grandparents, the Southern accent tends to emerge a little.
It turns to emerge a little even when you talk about them. I just noticed that. So and that's what makes everything so interesting. So please continue.
All right. So my grandparents, or as I called them, Doc and Grandma, Doc actually picked up his name. He ran a fish market for 45 years, and he picked up the name Doc because one of his customers called him a fish doctor because he was like a surgeon when he cleaned fish. So the name kind of stuck. Some of his customers also referred to him as the fish man. He lived to be 95 and a half years old, and apparently when you get to be 95, you get to count halves again. He was very particular. He'd tell you he was 95 and a half, and my dad and I just got a kick out of that. He and my grandmother were married for 65 years, and my grandmother, she made it to 91, and technically she owned the fish market, but Doc actually ran it. So these are a few stories about them. So as a young child, I frequented the fish market quite a bit. My parents would drop me off, and I basically would hang out with my grandparents while they worked, and then afterwards I would go home with them and usually spend the night or whatever. So, it was so funny. I think back, this was probably the early to mid 70s, and I would go there. I was, running around, but not a whole lot past a toddler. and I would get to, basically be behind the counters, the business, and people would come in and I would just be running around playing or whatever. And I remember that there was a huge stove. It was a coal burning stove that they used. It was in the corner of the building. This heated the entire building because they didn't have central heat and air back then.
Sure.
So, at least not in this building. So I remember my grandmother told me once, the stove's hot, don't touch it. And it was one of those things where that was kind of a lesson learned, and compared to these days where we have to have signs and alerts and everything. Back then she told me once the stove was hot, and I learned real quick, don't touch it.
Did you actually have to find out for yourself?
Oh, the thing, let me give you an idea. The thing was so hot, they actually would put a coffee pot, just a plain pot on top of it. It was hot enough to make coffee. So that's how hot that big metal stove got.
Okay, sure. My dad was something of a survivalist nut in the same time period, and we had a wood burning stove that was actually made out of an old water heater.
Oh, wow.
That he had welded, a lid and flue and the whole thing. And it was fairly elaborate. It looked ridiculous, but it was the same thing that you could be 3 feet away from it and still, feel the heat radiating. So, I understand where you're going. Okay.
Yeah. So that was one of the first lessons is, they'll tell you once the stove is hot or whatever, and you're supposed to listen and just understand after that, I guess, follow directions. So moving on to my grandmother, we all have hobbies that we love. And I think for my grandmother, she was a traditional Southern cook, incredible cook. And one of the things that she would do with me when I would come over, and that's just, oh goodness, I was probably 5 or 6, up until adulthood, is she liked to cook with me. And she would start, to give you an idea, she would start preparing the meal at around 10 a.m. for lunchtime, because they would always have a big lunch and vegetables and meat and the whole works. And it was one of those things where as far as lessons learned, I learned how to cook from her. But one of the wonderful things about it now is frequently when I cook, or especially when I cook certain things, it reminds me of my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And that, even the smell of food, et cetera, just, it really reminds me of her. And my wife and I, we have a few recipes that were, there was a running joke for years after I got married. I was very fortunate that my grandparents lived till I was in my younger 40s. And my wife and I, my grandmother found out that my wife, who was a little bit of a picky eater about some things, she liked chicken broccoli casserole. So the running joke was, after she found out, every single time we would go to my grandmother's house and have lunch, chicken broccoli casserole was what we always had.
Okay.
But
very nice. Okay. Wow. So very, very considerate of your wife then, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. So another story about my grandmother. My grandmother never drove, and my dad used to refer to her as the nervous passenger, because somebody would be driving and she would almost stomp to the floorboard trying to hit that brake on the passenger side. That never existed. But the funny thing is, I learned from watching her all those years, don't be a backseat driver, because I saw how much it irritated my dad, my grandfather. So I learned real quick not to be a backseat driver.
Okay. Very cool. And now that lesson to me, I mean, I'm looking at that as being something that applicable more than the literal sense. Really.
I think so.
I mean, I think it's something that you can apply to business, to, your personal life, to, personal relationships. Is that sometimes you don't have that control, and when you're trying to when you think you're making these decisions and you're not actually in control, that's stressful.
Oh, absolutely. And I think some personalities more so than others.
True.
But as I said in a comment earlier today, sometimes I have to practice letting go.
Right. That's definitely an art and one that you don't master and then go, okay, I've got it now. float off into float off into whatever, this state of being able to do that all the time. It just doesn't work. Yeah.
It's very true. It's one of the reasons I meditate daily, and I try to get better at it every day.
So let's talk about that. I'm a big fan. But, I'm as frustrated as anybody with it, which I think maybe half the point of it is to just frustrate you to the point of not having a point. Tell me about your meditation.
Well, a couple of years ago, I started using the Calm app on my phone. You can get them for Android or Apple.
Yeah.
And it has been a real blessing. They kind of use gamification to make meditation and keeping up the practice more fun. Now, I think I had a streak running at one point after I got it 287 days in a row that I managed to meditate. And I was really proud of myself. And then something happened. I don't remember what it was. It may have been around hurricane season. And I skipped a day. And I was almost heartbroken. Once again, I had to let it go. But I lost my streak, and since then I've tried to build it back up slowly. But yeah, it's really nice. I do a walking meditation, and it gets me outside, especially since the pandemic. It gives me a good reason to be outside, gives me a good reason to exercise, and I get to center my mind while I'm doing it.
That's beautiful. I do want to stop real quick, if you don't mind, to say hello to Donna, who's hanging out with us, and backseat drivers. Yikes! I can definitely relate to that, sure. But thank you so much for hanging out with us. I just wanted to say hello before we went on. You bring up walking meditation, and that's such a interesting point, and something that I've wrestled with and kind of came to my own conclusions about this, that meditation doesn't have to be the lotus position, the back straight and the cave in Nepal or whatever. The more of what you think it has to be, the more stressful it is and the less productive it is. To me, I'm meditating right now because I am in the now having a conversation with you.
I like that. That's beautiful.
That's all really meditation is. It's the quieting the chatter of the mind and being in the now. Right now, the chatter is not bothering me because you and I are having a conversation. To me, this is meditation. But I'm weird, so what do I know? Anyway.
Hey, whatever works for you, man.
Yeah, you're like, whatever helps you sleep at night, weirdo. Yeah. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so what else you got?
Well, I thought I'd tell a few more stories if you don't mind.
Please do.
My first job was actually working in that fish market, and one of my jobs was cleaning fish. So I worked back in the back of the shop and was helping out. This is back early 70s, like I guess latter 70s as well. And the biggest thing I learned was the value of hard work. I was working probably 8-10-hour days. I actually got paid $5 for working the entire day. And of course, my grandparents would buy me lunch and dinner, et cetera. But it was a great experience. And I learned how to clean fish really well during that time.
I have to wonder what that experience is like because I'm not a fish person. I will eat it if it's like the mild, fish and chips. Like it doesn't even count, right? But it's just like what we've done to it makes it not fish anymore. That's okay. I can handle that. But just the smell of the whole thing. So it's like to me, I'm like this world that holds such amazing memories for you, I think. Maybe not pot. I'm sure you didn't love coming home smelling like fish every day, but
it's funny. I was thinking about this. This is one of the things I really liked is when I was thinking about this, it reminded me of our fish market, there were 2 ceiling fans, and I mentioned the heater earlier. There was no central heat and air. So overnight, the fans were turned off and it was basically left to sit with all those fish and
Mm.
several 100 pounds of fish on ice every night. So the first thing you do every morning, I go in there with my grandparents and open up the fish market. And talk about strong. When the customers came in, it had been open for probably half an hour, and they had these two big screen doors in the front, so there was fresh air coming in. They had the fans running, so it wasn't bad by the time the customers came in. But boy,
Ooh.
first thing in the morning, that was an incredible smell of fish.
I think that would probably beat any cup of coffee you were likely to find as a wake up tool. Honestly,
Oh yeah.
I think that would just be incredibly jarring. But that's part of your story, and that's really cool. I've never met anyone who been involved in a fish market, in that industry. It's hard. It looks like incredibly hard work, and I'm sure that it is.
You know,
Go ahead,
sorry, go
please.
ahead, Lee. No, I was going to say my grandfather, he worked there 45 years. He was on a concrete floor every single day. Like I said, no air conditioning at all. And I remember him being a kid, and he would show me the muscles on the side of his arms. And what it was from is he would have, there's a big walk-in cooler in the back. Now that was obviously kept cold, but he would grab these boxes of fish and drag them across the concrete floor. And the man had just incredible muscles in his arms and legs from pulling those boxes of fish, probably 50, 60 pounds of fish with ice and everything else on top of it.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was a lot of hard work. And it wasn't until I got bigger until I was even able to pull the fish around and do that type of work.
Sure. That's incredible. I mean, what drove him all those years? I mean, I know, you have to work, you have to do something, but to be able to do that for that long and grind through that kind of work, there's definitely days where you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't ice fish, heavy. No, and you do it anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, and that kind of leads really well into a segue into my next story. Is in the spring and the fall, during the week, he would work in a fish market. And on the weekends, what we would do for fun? We'd go fishing.
Oh,
yeah, so,
okay.
Yeah, so Dad and I would get up, and I was still living at home during this time. Dad and I would get up. It was an hour drive to Grandma and Doc's house. So we'd get up probably about 6 o'clock in the morning, drive an hour, get down there 7:15, 7:30 by the time we had breakfast. And we would spend the entire day out on the water. And, it was speckled trout, or sometimes, and this is back before they had all the limits and everything on saltwater fishing in Florida, but we would go out, and my favorite was shark fishing. I mean, I've literally fought with sharks for 45 minutes to an hour.
Wow.
Had some of the best memories of doing that. It was just such a fun time. I mean, you're literally sitting in, this is not that big of a boat, probably 16 feet or so, 18 feet maybe. And you're literally sitting in a boat, and the shark is swimming around in the water and dragging the boat with it. And you're just holding on for dear life. It's like all you can do to hold on to this thing while he drags the boat around. So it was a lot of fun. But so the lesson learned from there, the hard way, be careful of the sun, because it will get you, and sunscreen and everything else. Of course, back in the 70s, sunscreen was not as popular, or even in the 80s. But it is. I've learned the hard way to be careful of that sun, because it will get you.
Absolutely. Wow. Yep. And hopefully the sharks won't.
Oh yeah. Speaking of that, it's funny you mentioned that. I keep coming back to all these old memories. True story here, because obviously, why would I tell it if it wasn't true? Doc was actually, let's see. Doc was holding on to an end of probably a 4 or 5 foot shark. They had pulled it out of the water. My dad was trying to hold on to it with a hook to keep its mouth. Well, he managed to shake free. The shark grabbed the back of Doc's pant leg, tore it off, didn't leave a scratch on his leg. I don't know how it happened, but he did not tore off the back of his pants leg, but didn't leave a scratch on his leg somehow.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, talk about luck, and then we've seen so many stories about what sharks can do, and somehow they managed to escape with no bloodshed, which is an amazing thing.
Incredible, and so happy and thankful for that. Definitely.
Yeah.
Are about to move on to our second part of this. Do you have any parting thoughts that you'd like to leave in this section before we go on to the pitching?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I've pretty much told most of my stories. So
okay, well, cool. Well, that's wonderful. Then we can go ahead and as soon as I find the right banner here, tag on it. It's time for Chris to pitch up a storm. I'm a man of my word, and I give you 5 minutes or so to tell us how to find out more about you, what you sell, what people can do, where to contact you, all that stuff. The floor is yours, my friend.
All right. I'll just keep it real short and sweet. I'm a freelance technology copywriter. So I write white papers, case studies, etc. for technology companies. And I'm looking for new clients if there are some people out there that are interested. I also, as you know, Lee, I've been writing for LinkedIn, and I want to say thank you because you've been a real inspiration for my writing style. You've encouraged me to step outside of that comfort zone, that especially being a technology writer, we all, I started out, it was very boring, to be honest. It was very factual, which, facts are fine, but as we've all learned, you can write an extremely factual post and get crickets.
Mm-hmm.
So
definitely,
you've inspired me on that for LinkedIn. I really appreciate it. I'm still trying to push myself further and further outside of that comfort zone.
It's a very long process, and if I can offer any advice, I would say be patient with that process. I spent a year trying to build a presence on Instagram, which was a total freaking waste of time. But I met a guy over there who kept telling me, every time you think you're not pushing, every time you think you're being too much, you're not pushing hard enough. And he would just keep coming back to that. And to this day, I've never met the guy or had, voice conversation or anything, but he was just the guy that would show up and be like, just push harder. And I'd be like, well, what the hell? I feel like I'm already offending people, because I'm trying to be different. And this isn't enough. Just keep going. And it took about 2 years to just start peeling away all those layers and come back to the point where I could, infuse the personality into what I do and not really give a crap what anybody thinks of it. But still influence and engage and do what we need to do to get clients. So
sure,
definitely on that, it's not something that happens overnight. 2 years ago, I was terrified to get in front of a camera. So no, this is true. I have a friend named Brian Brody who may be listening. The man has endured 5 brain surgeries, and so he's a little off. But he's the one that I met him and he put me in front of a camera and said, "You will dance, monkey," and so that had a lot to do with it too. So I'm glad to see that you're doing that, and I'm seeing the personality in your posts. I love what you're doing. And guys, if you need a tech copywriter, go talk to Chris. I'm not touching it. I'm a huge advocate for specializing in copywriting because tech, you can do it better than anybody I know. So, it's a lot to be said for that. Go talk to Chris. And I think I did. So I got that right, and we'll throw the link in the chat when the show is done too, so that you can go ahead and connect with Chris if you haven't already. Any final thoughts?
Can I tell one more real quick story?
Oh, go right ahead.
All right. This is a little darker, but I'll get there in just a minute. Okay. So I knew my grandparents for 40 plus years, and it was interesting to me because during my grandmother's funeral, they were given the eulogy, and somebody got up and they talked about how my grandmother wanted to travel. Lee, my mind was blown. I thought, how did I live 40 years? I've known this woman for 40 years. How did I not know that she wanted to travel after she retired? And what they ended up doing was basically buying a house not too far from the water and stayed there for 20 years. And that was not what she wanted. But this realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and reminded me of it today, in that, live those dreams. If you want to travel when you retire, make sure you and your spouse, whatever, do it. Don't wait 20 years and then have somebody say at the end of your life, yeah, Lee wanted to travel, but he never did it. So that's kind of one of my biggest takeaways from this is, take the time. And my wife and I are planning to do some traveling once we retire and enjoy that time together.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's definitely an important thing to remember. As we age, I think we must be relatively close to the same age. But when we look down the road 20 years, we know that physically we're not going to be able to do the same things. And because I see things today that I'm like, I can't do that 20 years ago I could have done and didn't. So that's another important thing. When you retire, we all have this idea that somehow this, I think, this nebulous thing that it's all going to be okay, and something's going to happen, and everything's going to just start going perfectly, and we just ride out our lives in the sunset, and everything's wonderful. It never happens like that. Daggone it. I've just come to the conclusion. Look, no, it's not. There is no coming to that point where everything just starts going right, unicorns and daisies and lollipops and all that. You got to do it when the time's not right.
Sometimes that is very true.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing those stories and the wisdom of your grandparents. I've enjoyed getting to know you and getting to know them a little bit through you. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having me, Lee. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, we are out of time, but if you enjoyed Lee After Dark and found it more entertaining and relevant than most of the dreck out there, then go subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's leeafterdark.com. All right? Go subscribe, support this stuff, share it, tell people about it. What's the point of doing this if people aren't getting the benefit out of it? All right? Now, we're also releasing this in audio form. We're on Anchor FM, Google Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Pocket Rocket, heck, I don't know. Wherever the heck you stick your phone, you probably can get us, okay? So until next time, this is Lee Rowley with my friend Chris. Be present and be well.